Welcome back to Mystical Jesus, Episode 7. In our last episode, we talked about Jesus' teaching in the Gospel of Thomas on transcending the animal nature in order to realize the divine nature. And in today's episode, we're going to be looking at one of these passages where Jesus teaches that he is the way to man realizing his own divinity. So we'll be turning again to the mystic Gospel of John and looking at another one of the famous I am statements. And each one of these I am statements in the book of John reveals a different facet of the Christ nature. And so the passage we'll be looking at today comes from John chapter 15, verses 1 through 5, which reads, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. To truly appreciate how mystical this passage is, we need to take a look at how the view of Christ changes and evolves throughout the four canonical Gospels. Because the book of John is a very mystical approach to the Gospel narrative, which seems to be far more concerned with demonstrating the Christ nature than it is about telling the story of the man named Jesus. The Gospel of John shows us that this man Jesus had clearly realized an eternal dimension within himself that he had trouble articulating in the modern religious language. And so for that reason, he almost exclusively used parables and analogies like this one to try and capture it for his listeners. This is one of those passages that sort of confounds the religious mind, because there's just no way to literalize it. In fact, all of these radically mystical I am statements in the book of John get basically interpreted exactly the same, which is always, well, he's really just asking you to confess him as Lord verbally, which has about as much merit as saying that Jesus is telling you to vote for him for president. It's just nowhere to be found in the Gospels. This passage in particular destroys any notion that Jesus is referring to himself as a physical body, as it's obviously not possible for your physical body to go abide in another physical body, or vice versa. When Jesus says, abide in me as I already abide in you, he's clearly not speaking literally, but metaphysically. He is calling us to go into the depths, to experience him within ourselves, where the eternal Christ nature already exists. One of the reasons Jesus said, "It is better for you that I go away," is because he knew that as long as he was still dwelling within a physical body, people would only look to his physical form. And Jesus turned out to be right. Because as we look at the picture that is painted of Christ in each of the four consecutive Gospels, it is clear that the farther removed the writers were from Jesus' physical incarnation, the better they seemed to understand the Christ nature. The Gospel of Mark, written around 70 AD, portrays Jesus as a fully human adult male. No virgin birth or immaculate conception is ever mentioned. According to Mark, Jesus becomes God-infused during the act of baptism when the Spirit descends from heaven as a dove. However, Matthew and Luke, written around the early 90s, expand upon Mark's original idea by saying that the Christ nature was given to Jesus at the moment of his conception, and tell of a long and dramatic virgin birth story that does not appear in the Gospel of Mark just a few decades earlier. The idea that Jesus was conceived through a virgin birth is something that the writer of Mark and the Apostle Paul would have never heard of, and likely would have sounded inconceivable to them. Yet the Christ story evolves this narrative with time because it was clear to those early Christians that the miracle of the Christ nature could not have happened through a baptism alone, but it must have been something even more miraculous than that. And by the Gospel of John, writing after 100 AD, Jesus existed as the Christ before time even began. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing has come into being. For the writer of John, nothing exists outside or apart from this universal Christ energy. There is no mention of a second coming in the Gospel of John, because for this Jewish mystic, God accomplished exactly what he wanted to in the person of Jesus, by demonstrating a self-perfected being to the world, who had realized his Christ nature. In John 1:14, the writer says that the Logos became flesh and dwelt among us. And the word among in Greek is the word en, which literally means in or within. And the word en is used in the New Testament approximately 1,902 times, translated as in or within, and just over 100 times translated as among. And so obviously the King James translators would have wanted to use the among translation in order to picture the Christ as being exclusive to the body of Jesus alone, which came and, dwelt around us and among us, but not within us. But what if that's not what the writer of John intended? What if he intended it exactly how it's normally translated, which would read, "The Logos became flesh and dwelt within us"? This seems to be very much the picture that Jesus is painting in John chapter 15. Abide in me as I abide in you. Speaking as the Christ nature, Jesus declares that he already abides in them. And why would he have said that if the Christ nature was exclusive to his body alone? And furthermore, Jesus is clearly using this analogy of the vine and its branches to sort of paint this intimate picture of an indwelling presence or an energy or the lifeblood of the vine that permeates all of its branches. What Jesus is really pointing to in this teaching is that the Christ nature abides in the soul of man, which we know to be the Kundalini, the 7 energy centers of the chakra network. This is the part of us that reincarnates lifetime after lifetime into different bodies and evolves and grows with every incarnation. And in the ancient Hindu tradition, the Kundalini is pictured as a coiled serpent, which rises up as the cosmic prana flows up the 7 energy centers. And so this Kundalini serpent could also be pictured as a vine, and the 7 energy centers as the branches. This is what Christ says that his Father prunes that they may bear good fruit. And in the Law of One, Ra also describes this in session 49, questions 5 and 6. The most important concept to grasp about the energy field is that the lower or negative pole will draw the universal energy into itself from the cosmos. Therefrom, it will move upward to be met and reacted to by the positive spiraling energy moving downward from within. The measure of an entity's level of ray activity is the locus wherein the South Pole outer energy has been met by the inner spiraling positive energy. As an entity grows more polarized, this locus will move upwards. This phenomenon has been called by your peoples the Kundalini. However, it may be better thought of as the meeting place of cosmic and inner, shall we say, vibratory understanding. The metaphor of the coiled serpent being called upwards is vastly appropriate for consideration by your peoples. So in the 7 energy centers, we have 2 polarized energies which meet at any given place. The lower three chakras represent the animal or human nature, and the upper three represent the Christ or divine nature. Universal energy, or cosmic prana, is drawn in through the negative pole and moves up the chakra network. The more unblocked and clear each energy center becomes, the higher up the cosmic energy can meet the downward spiraling energy. And when this meeting place happens at the third eye center, the vision of Christ is opened, where one realizes themselves to be the entire universe. Ra describes this as well in session 57, question 33. In the experiences of the mystical search for unity, the seeker seeks the one. This one is to be sought, as we have said, by the balanced and self-accepting self, aware both of its apparent distortions and its total perfection. Resting in this balanced awareness, the entity then opens the self to the universe which it is. The light energy of all things may then be attracted by this intense seeking, and wherever the inner seeking meets the attracted cosmic prana, realization of the one takes place. One of the ancient Jewish analogies that the prophets used to describe the people of Israel was that they were God's vineyard. And so Jesus is pulling this common Jewish analogy, which all of his Jewish listeners of the time would have understood, in order to really drive home his message of mystical oneness. He declares to them that he is the very indwelling presence in man, as a vine is to its branches. He is the very cosmic energy that flows through the vine of the Kundalini. And without Christ, our branches, or energy centers, cannot be healed. So to abide in Christ, as Christ abides in us, is simply to seek the Christ nature within, which begins to call the cosmic prana to move upwards towards the third eye center, where Christ consciousness is activated. In Hinduism, the word for Christ is Atman, which is the divine or perfected self within man. And Brahman is the universal spirit or consciousness which pervades everything, the absolute reality. And this is what Jesus referred to as the Father. And so although there is a distinction between the two, most Hindu schools of thought draw no lines between them and simply use them synonymously. Scriptures such as all is Brahman and all is Atman. And these are very similar to the ways that the Apostle Paul uses the words God and Christ interchangeably in many of his writings, such as Colossians 3:11, which says, "There is only Christ. He is everything, and he is in everything. And God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself." So if Jesus had been speaking to a Hindu audience, he probably would have said, "I am the Atman. My Father is Brahman. Every branch within me that bears good fruit, he prunes, that it can bear even more fruit." Meaning, I am purified by the essence of Brahman that flows within me, and so I have become the Atman. Jesus, the man, became Christ, the consciousness, because he knew that I and the Father, Atman and Brahman, are one. So to allow the Father to prune our branches is to allow the Christ energy within us to heal and balance our energy centers so that we can bear more of the good fruits of love and unity, wisdom and authenticity, spiritual vision, and God realization. One more interesting note on this passage is that in the Law of One, Ra describes the Logos as being the original thought of the Creator. In the beginning was the Logos. And so the Logos made flesh, dwelling within us, is essentially the original intention of what man can become. Christ, the Atman, is your highest potential. The original thought which lies waiting to be realized from within. And to realize it is simply to seek it with all of your heart. To meditate upon it day and night and allow that original thought of the Christ energy to purify you from the inside out. And simply by doing this, we more and more become living reflections of it, showing the world that the Christ was not a one-time event, but that the Christ is resurrected every single time one is pulled from within by their longing for God realization. And so although religion says that the incarnation of Christ happened only one time in all of human history, Jesus clearly declares in John 15 that the incarnation of Christ is as universal to all people as a vine is to all of its branches. In the opening chapter, John writes that not a single thing came into being apart from Christ, and that his life is the very light within man. The true vine of the indwelling presence of the cosmic Christ.